guns, and money. Send lawyers, guns, and money.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. This week is a special episode as we are reporting live from the DePaul Sports Law Symposium. Alongside Dan Wallach, myself, Dan Lusk, we are joined by Emily Farr. From here on out, I'm going to cede the floor to Emily to moderate this special conversation of Conduct Detrimental. Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dan, and both Dans. It's so great to be with you today at DePaul. Really appreciate you coming out for your podcast. So let me start, because I know there are a lot of questions we want to cover. Dan Wallach, there's so much out there in the last couple of years, from sports teams attempting to unionize, to free speech issues, to licensing. What developments do you find the most interesting in 2020?
Well, I think the number one story, at least in my practice, and Emily, thanks for joining us on this special edition of Conduct Detrimental. I mean, in sports law, there's really, new controversies, new cases almost by the day or by the week. But in my practice, I've been focusing my attention mainly on the rise and expansion of sports betting nationwide. 2 years ago, the United States Supreme Court overturned the federal law that prohibited states from legalizing sports betting. And in just 2 short years, we've gone from just one state that had sports betting to now 25 states plus the District of Columbia. So on my watch and in my realm, that is probably the most intriguing story over the last couple of years. With several of the larger markets in the on-deck circle, like California, Texas, and Florida, I think that's going to loom as a major story, at least in the legislative arena. And then this will completely transform the way we consume and watch and think about sports. So that's number one for me.
What do you think, Dan? Any thoughts for 2020?
Dan and I have spoken with this on prior podcasts, and maybe we have a slight disagreement, but there was a lot of attention paid to the 3 states that passed sports betting legislation this past election cycle. So that brings us, Dan, am I correct? Is that a total of 21 at this point, 21 states?
No, it was 22, the 3 on election day, bumped the number up, I think, from 22 to 25. Again, the number changes every month, but I think it's exactly at 25 today.
So, maybe this is just the we'll say, like, in a different path, I might have been somewhat of a professional gambler had I not gone to law school and all that fun stuff. But I do think we're trending in a direction where it's almost at a practical level, at a dollars and cents level, it makes sense for every state to legalize sports betting. Cannabis is making its way there. Obviously, if it's legal in all 50 states to have some form of alcohol, cannabis will get there. And for years, sports betting was as taboo as cannabis, and they're both making their way there. So I think it's a matter of when all 50 states legalize. Maybe at some point there'll be clean federal legislation, but for now, Dan makes his living in the sports betting space, kind of going through the matrix and the really deep complexities of all the various state betting laws, be it mobile betting, be it actually at a casino. So it's a very complicated web. So I love picking Dan's brain on those issues.
That's really interesting. And then let me ask you, because when you mentioned in-person betting versus obviously there's betting online. Obviously with COVID, the reason we're not all together is because there's a global pandemic. How has that impacted, if at all, sports betting, and has it sped up any of these changes you're talking about?
So, Dan, I want to give you the legal part, but I will say from a bettor's perspective, from a gambling perspective, there was almost a hunger to place wagers of some sort, right? Because there were no sports for 3-4 months. So I don't think anybody expected bettors to come back, but I think Dan points this out on Twitter all the time. The amount of money that's being bet not say post-COVID, but in the later stage of COVID, I think is significantly up year over year, Dan. Am I on the right track here, Mr. Guru?
Well, yeah, the numbers reported out of some of the states that have both mobile and brick and mortar sports betting, have broken their own records month after month after month. Nevada was the, sports betting king at the very beginning, and now New Jersey and Pennsylvania have overtaken it. Illinois is going to be this, monster, when the market matures. But what the pandemic, I think, has done is highlighted the need for a mobile wagering product because, social distancing requirements, and at least in Illinois, I think casinos are not doing the kind of business they've been doing previously. People are reluctant to go out and be around other people in a social situation. So, the pandemic has, I think, accentuated the need to modernize access to betting markets. I mean, we play daily fantasy sports over our phone, our mobile devices, laptops. We shop and purchase goods online. We bank online, buy movie tickets. It's natural that the next progression, at least with regard to sports wagering, would be a fully mobile market. And already we're seeing in a limited experience or a limited time horizon in states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania, the market is 90% mobile, 10% retail. And I think it's only going to get more disparate as more folks become acclimated to consuming or betting online. I think that's where the trends are going. Originally, sports betting was thought to be a driver of traffic to casinos and racetracks. But what we're seeing in the last 1 year is a product that has exploded in a mobile capacity, and with more attention and focus placed on in-game wagering. Those are the kinds of bets that can more easily be made via mobile devices in real time than lining up at a betting window at a racetrack. So I think states that were considering but not entirely on board with mobile wagering will now be much more incentivized to add a mobile betting product, not just for the ease and convenience of the customers, but to capture the full potential of the market, which in turn drives state tax revenues.
That's so fascinating. And it's interesting because I'm an employment lawyer. And one of the things that I blog about is remote employment and how it's jumped. In 10 years, we've just sped up because of COVID, at least a decade, I think. And when you're talking about people lining up, it makes me think, this is also obviously a public health issue, right? I mean, at some point, it is better for people to be equipped to be on their own, as we worry more about infectious diseases and viruses, and not to mention, I mean, the psychology of COVID, right? When it's over, there will still be people who don't feel comfortable in crowds, right?
I mean, think about the concert industry, the theater industry. I mean, are any of us going to be comfortable, in the front row at a concert? Will the industry recover prior to 2022? I don't think so. So the same reasoning and rationale, I think, applies to other venues that attract that would tend to attract large numbers of people. I'm not going to be going to a racetrack. You can give me front row tickets to Bruce Springsteen. I'm not going to go. And I think a lot of folks feel that way. So it really does, to have the sports betting environment be brick and mortar only is really, it was an anachronism in 2019. In 2020, it's just reckless.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, switching topics real quick, though, we have so much to go over. I just want to make sure I hit on all my questions. Dan Lust, I follow you on Twitter, and I see that there's a good amount of tweeting you're doing about defamation actions. Do you think these defamatory actions are coming about, at a higher rate due to COVID, or is something else going on? People just meaner?
Well, I think the one that you might be touching on is this recent case, and Dan and I were just actually talking about it offline. DeAndre Baker was a cornerback for the New York Giants. One of the wildest sports law stories you will ever hear about. DeAndre Baker was criminally charged with armed robbery for an incident that occurred in Broward County, Florida. We can get into the whole kit and caboodle, but essentially what happened was he was at a party where there was a robbery of some sort that occurred. Whether or not he was involved, we're not sure. But at least at one point, prosecutors in Florida thought it sufficient to charge him with felony aggravated armed robbery for using a firearm in the course of the robbery. And that was really based on the statements of 4 victims who somehow or another, even though he allegedly had a mask on his face, were confident that it was him and put in sworn affidavits saying that he was directly involved and was, in some way, shape, or form, appeared to them to be the ringleader of the whole operation. So this was back in mid-May, and now we're 6 months later. And why, we could go over the twists and turns that really kind of take this over the top and being one of the craziest sports law stories. But really Friday, November 13th, last Friday, these same 4 witnesses submitted a sworn affidavit in which they declared that DeAndre Baker was not involved, either directly or indirectly, in this lawsuit. What had happened, or in this criminal charge. And then I guess in those 6 months, what you need to know is that DeAndre Baker's life was turned upside down. Former first-round draft pick of the New York Giants was released and kind of cast aside by the NFL as a pariah. And all of a sudden, Friday, these witnesses basically just changed their version of events, which people obviously thought was strange. And then Monday morning, the real bombshell, the lawyers for these victims gets arrested on extortion charges that he allegedly was trying to negotiate a payment in exchange for them changing their stories. So there was numbers being talked about 1.5 million, 800,000. No indication that any money was actually accepted by DeAndre Baker, and that's why they changed their stories. But neither here nor there. 10 minutes later, literally on Twitter, all charges dropped by the prosecutor's office. So defamation, is coming up because what is DeAndre Baker going to do, right? Someone said that he was the ringleader of an armed robbery. And we're not really sure. Dan and I were talking offline if this is true or false, or if we just know that the witnesses are kind of corrupt. But if this is someone that's going to fight to get his reputation back, he's going to do it via a defamation lawsuit, saying that it harmed his reputation, that it was objectively untrue. So that's the world we're in now. I'm not sure if it's really kind of COVID related. Maybe at some point, you get there, and when COVID is officially over, right, the pandemic is officially done, we could see what the true effects of defamation are with respect to a pandemic. But this is one of these really, really strange stories that you're not going to come across that often, maybe ever again in such a high-profile case.
Wow.
Yeah, I think what happened here, with the bribery charges and the extortion charges, that many take that or assume that means that they were lying the entire time. I think that these charges don't necessarily preclude the possibility or the likelihood that the witnesses told law enforcement the truth. In the original incident report, that this event or incident did happen that way, but these witnesses may have decided to leverage or try to sell their recantation testimony for profit. So I don't know that this gets DeAndre Baker completely out of the clear. And if he files a defamation action, that throws all this open into discovery. And he wants to renew his National Football League career. He wants to play again. And I don't think the NFL has completely shut the door on any investigations of DeAndre Baker. I think that could become a live issue. And the last thing that Baker should want to do here is raise the specter of deposition discovery where he might have to go under oath.
Wow.
And other witnesses could come out of the woodwork.
Right. Do you see there being, just as a follow-up to that, anything that the Colin Kaepernick case or Colin Kaepernick himself could use? Looking literally at this other guy as a comparator, if you will. I know people have said there's a lot of First Amendment issues with Kaepernick and retaliation alleged. Is there any connection there in your mind? Are they trading any strategy, or those totally separate?
Yeah, at least from my vantage point, it seems to be separate. The Kaepernick is, Kaepernick's name is coming up more and more in some of these conversations. Actually, not probably another topic that's probably fair game for this. Antonio Brown is a wide receiver in the NFL that brings up a lot of headlines for the wrong reason, right? He has civil sexual assault case, criminal assault charges. The newest this past week, he allegedly threw a bike at the surveillance camera, which could be, in theory, maybe a violation of his criminal probation. So the reason I bring Antonio Brown up, Antonio's had his fair share of legal troubles, at least as of late, locker room troubles as of late. but he is now signed to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Tom Brady, and the team has won 3 in a row. And every time I post about Antonio Brown, or I see one of Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport talking about Antonio Brown, people in the comments are very quick to say, Colin Kaepernick did not commit any crime, and he still hasn't been able to find a team. Why is Antonio Brown getting all these chances to play? And I think it's a fair question. I really do.
Yeah, but it's also in my view an example of the whataboutism that has entered into the discussion in the sports world. I think those are 2 completely different cases. Obviously, we can all agree that Colin Kaepernick deserves a chance to renew his NFL career, but Antonio Brown is judged on the merits of Antonio Brown, and given his past history, he's really on the National Lampoon Animal House equivalent of double secret probation. I mean, one slip up here, the NFL would not hesitate to suspend him again, and his get out of jail free card, his only get out of jail free card, is his relationship with Tom Brady. And the reality that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are all in for this year, come hell or high water. There's no, 5-year plan. This is all built around the notion of winning now. And if Tom Brady has Antonio Brown's back, that's all that Antonio Brown needs to worry about within the Tampa Bay Buccaneers culture. But he has the NFL to contend with, and the NFL has placed him in the equivalent of hyperspace for almost a year, on the basis of nothing more than a civil lawsuit, and then suspended him for 8 games based upon what I didn't think were proven allegations. So the NFL has overpunished Brown in the past, and it's not going to take much for the NFL's, I guess, justice system to impose additional system on Antonio Brown. When is Commissioner Goodell ever gone light in the disciplinarian or in the disciplinary arena? And I think Antonio Brown is playing with fire, and sometimes he just can't help himself. Trouble just comes to him like no one I've ever seen in the National Football League. He brings it on himself. So, I mean, we're getting deep into the NFL regular season, but I don't know what's going to become of Brown after this year, but he's definitely playing with fire. And luckily, Tom Brady has his back.
One more thing I just want to add, and then we can kind of move on. I mean, Dan and I, we've talked in different instances. Our podcast is called Conduct Detrimental. So if a football player does something wrong, that's usually our wheelhouse. The fun, I don't want to say fun, but the interesting thing to watch for with DeAndre Baker, it looks by all indications like he's going to sign with the defending Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs. People have we'll say, forgot about the fact that there is still an NFL suspension that is looming potentially. So in the court of law, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt to prove someone's guilt. In the court of Roger Goodell, the standard is credible evidence, which I don't know if you're going to bring an open complaint against someone and bring charges against somebody, right? There's probable cause. Whether or not the witnesses are contradictory doesn't really matter for purposes of credible evidence. I don't think it's going to happen, but I also don't think it would be crazy. And it's so unexpected if DeAndre Baker got hit with some type of suspension. Mind you, he was at a party during a pandemic in Florida when he was not supposed to be.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's funny you mentioned that. I wrote about the credible evidence standard last year for The Athletic. I mean, it's the lowest standard you can imagine in the law. You have proof beyond a reasonable doubt for criminal, preponderance of the evidence for civil cases. Credible evidence means any credible evidence. And in the DeAndre Baker and Quentin Dunbar cases, you have law enforcement officer affidavits based upon interviews with witnesses. One could argue, well, it may not be persuasive. It may be borderline credible, but it at the very least satisfies the baseline for credible evidence. So Goodell has more than enough ammo to shelve DeAndre Baker if he chooses to believe that testimony, and it vests Goodell with considerable discretion that's almost immune from any kind of appellate review. So I don't think the door has been shut on NFL discipline when it comes to DeAndre Baker. But if nothing else comes out about his case and no more witnesses or additional witnesses surface, I think in all likelihood he'll be able to continue his career with the Chiefs. And the irony is that the Chiefs are now getting a first-round draft pick from a year ago and not having to pay any part of his signing bonus when the Giants drafted him in the first round, traded up traded 3 draft choices to move up into the first round and paid him a $6 million signing bonus, and then cut him, when the charges were pending, and now cannot recoup any part of that signing bonus. So the Giants invested all these assets, paid him a signing bonus, and now the Chiefs are going to reap the rewards and the benefits of picking him up on the cheap.
Wow. I don't know what lesson to take from that, but that's an interesting twist. And
what's the lesson? Don't cut a player until you're absolutely sure he's going to be found guilty, because the Giants really had nothing to gain by cutting him precipitously. I mean, we can all play Monday morning quarterback and have the benefit of all this 2020 hindsight, because in August, it looked pretty bad for DeAndre Baker. But the Giants weren't going to get out of his signing. The Giants were never going to be able to recoup his signing bonus. So there was absolutely at least no long-term or short-term incentive to cutting bait with him in August. They could have just kept him on the, suspended or not the suspended, but the paid with leave, and just held on to his rights. And then if he was convicted and sentenced to a jail term of more than 1 year, where he would have missed 21 and 22 seasons, at that point the Giants could have recouped at least that portion of his signing bonus. Now they get nothing for their investment, and another team gets him free and clear.
Wow. Do you think that's going to change teams' behaviors in the future?
No, but it's going to get Dave Gettleman, the general manager of the New York Giants, potentially fired.
Okay.
I think he was already
for that reason, among others.
Yeah, it wouldn't. We'll say the proximate cause is unclear. It's a cause.
Okay. Hopefully he doesn't get a golden parachute on the way out, and then they're just paying more money. Okay, so you guys, I mean, obviously you have a wealth of information when it comes to sports law. And as a lawyer, I'm more of the variety of, I do some employment law, I'm a general commercial litigator, but nowhere near this type of niche experience. And I just wonder, for the people who have come from DePaul, and for your listeners who may or may not be lawyers, but, have their own careers, how did you both get into or determine that you wanted to really drill down into this specific industry within the law?
So, I guess in a nutshell, and I should also mention, we were recording this at 8:00 on Wednesday night. So if I yell out a shriek, it might be because I have the NBA draft on in the background. But it's, to answer your question, I mean, I am a sports nut in every sense of the word. When I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just said, I want to be involved in sports in some sense. My first taste of sports was working for the New York Giants Public Relations Department. So I'm a little biased when it comes to Giant stuff, so we don't need to get into that stuff. But, I got the taste there, and then I just kind of said, and a lot of smart people around me said, just get a law degree, and then it might help you do what you want to do in sports. So, I learned over the next, 8-9 years at this point, from the beginning of law school and until today. The goal of the way that you get into the sports field is not by knowing a lot about sports. It's by being a very good lawyer. But as Dan and I, we're definitely on the same page on this. Knowing a lot of sports is going to be helpful if you're a very good attorney on top of it. So that's just the way that my mind works. I didn't really know there was a field to be a true lawyer, and also separately just working around sports. So I recently, after being in this kind of hybrid sports media space for almost 2 years, just kind of reporting on sports and writing little blurbs, I got hired by a sports and entertainment firm to sue teams and represent player rights. So very much so me being a fan, but just having my own credentials as a litigator is what kind of just dropped me into this niche. It was definitely never the plan at any point. I wanted to be Jerry Maguire with, all the fancy catchphrases, but, life always has a path. So you just got to get along for the ride.
Yeah, I mean, I had a completely different pathway into sports law and gambling law. I was a commercial litigator and an appellate lawyer for close to 20 years. I mean, I was sort of a sleeper cell in sports law. I didn't even have any inkling that this would be the path I'd be going on until I was already in my early 50s. I had spent all the years practicing law as a partner at a law firm, and maybe it was a midlife crisis or maybe it was just fate or coincidence, but back in 2013, I was assigned a gambling case to represent a horse racetrack in a lawsuit against another horse racetrack. It's a state court case in Florida, and it just sort of, just galvanized me. I found this area of law like so fascinating. It's just simply the law of horse racing. But it got me interested in starting a blog on, I had one of the first gambling law blogs in the country. And I started that with the, I guess the blessing of my law firm. And I obsessed over a single case, one legal controversy, which was the impending legalization of sports betting. So going back 7 years, and just to kind of tie this all together, 7 years ago, I began blogging about New Jersey's efforts to overturn the federal ban on sports betting. And I covered all the court proceedings, wrote blog posts whenever anything happened in the federal court. And it caught an audience. It developed an audience and gained some traction. And I started developing a little bit of a persona around that. And I accidentally stumbled into this case when really, in essence, what it really was almost like a midlife crisis for a lawyer looking for a creative outlet. It was never part of any business plan, but I was so good at it. I was so passionate about it that I think I found a niche just from what originated as a hobby. And it's a very good lesson that when you hear Dan and I give our backgrounds, there are no similarities other than the fact that we had great passion for something. And in my case, it was writing about it and developing credibility based upon subject matter expertise. And once I had that, and it was in a field that there were so few lawyers talking about this, I think I had very few barriers to entry. And it was away I went. I was like the Neil Armstrong of sports betting law because I was one of the first to arrive on the scene. Today, there are like hundreds. But I can still ride on my own coattails from 2013, and I think that was the big path for me into sports law.
See, Dan, Neil Armstrong works, but like I don't really mind like a founding fathers like Abe Lincoln. You could have.
Yeah. Well, okay, and then I'll play to the audience here. And then the second big break was when I was asked to be a legal analyst and contributor to The Athletic, and I say that because I noticed that my editor is on the line. Diamond, how you doing, Diamond? All these crazy coincidences happened, but all of it stems and traces back to hard work and having a real abiding passion for a subject and being obsessed with it.
Yeah, no, I think that's the greatest lesson. I mean, look, when Dan Lust said it's 8 p.m. on Wednesday, I didn't think you were referring to the draft. I thought you were referring to the fact that it's 8 p.m. on Wednesday. You're doing something you love, obviously. So after a long day of work.
We have a 2-screen action going on. I mean, I can't miss the first pick of the draft.
No.
Set the tone for the NBA for years.
That's great.
I represented a little sidebar in the NBA draft. I represented Obi Toppin. Is that how you pronounce his name?
It's Toppin, but he might be
Obi Toppin. Yeah, I don't even know my own client. Shows you I don't know my own client's name, but I assisted Alan Milstein, noted sports lawyer, in representing Obi Toppin's father within the last couple of months having some past criminal history expunged from his record. So I have some 6 degrees of separation. So it hopefully will be a future member of the New York Knicks, but I guess we'll find out.
The arena that you're sitting in right now in that lovely luxury box that you have.
Yeah, it's not that lovely of a luxury box. If you could tell from the background, that must obviously be 1990s Madison Square Garden, because I have not seen the arena look like that during the James Dolan era.
You must have not been to a Ranger game recently, Dan.
No, that's basketball.
Oh, the Garden can get packed in. It just depends on the sport you're talking about. Knicks, not so much.
Well, it was at least before March of 2020. I can tell that from the crowd size, so.
Fair observation.
I have a question from the audience, so let me throw this out. Thoughts on Randy Gregory being reinstated and how the NFL handled his case specifically?
So my understanding about the Randy Gregory, well, I think Jordan that asked that must be a Cowboys fan, because no one has asked me about the Randy Gregory reinstatement ever. So I'm going to take a leap of faith that Jordan is a Cowboys fan. So Gregory is on the defensive line for the Cowboys. My understanding is he was out for about a year with a marijuana charge, and he missed, I think, the first 6 games. So, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue when it comes to marijuana suspensions is probably, that same conversation that's going on across all 50 states. When marijuana is decriminalized in any given state, right, should the people in jail that got in trouble for marijuana offenses, should they still have those, still sit in jail for another 6 years or however long they have on their sentences? Is that really fair? So when it comes to Gregory, I know the new CBA really took out the teeth of any type of marijuana punishment. So, yeah, I don't know if it's that fair, but again, you can't go, the argument against changing punishment is like ex post facto, right? If you do something at the time it's illegal, just because it's later decriminalized, does that take out, the wrongdoing? Is there, should you no longer be punished even though you did it intentionally while the thing was illegal? So I kind of see it both ways. I could make an argument either way. When it comes to marijuana offenses in general, I don't think it makes sense for someone to sit in jail for 10 years for an offense that is no longer criminal. But Gregory missed 6 games. The punishment, it is what it is. What it is. It's not as a lifetime ban or anything. So it seems like it's wrapping itself up soon. Dana, do you have anything else on the for our Jordan Myers, our resident Cowboys fan over here?
No, the Gregory case, never captivated me. There are so many suspensions in the NFL. That one didn't stay on my radar for very long. So no, I have nothing to add about the Gregory suspension.
Okay, shifting gears for a moment as we get closer to the end. Obviously this is one of a couple colleges that I understand you guys are touring on your podcast. And of course, sports fans already have a leg up in my mind with networking. I know this from not knowing a lot about sports, and I'm starting to learn very slowly. But as far as networking in a pandemic, it is challenging. What is some advice, you would give to, the young folks out there, not that you're not young, but the younger folks, on how to continue to keep up their networking, whether they're in law school right now, undergrad, or just starting out, particularly when there's so many barriers?
First of all, Emily, I take offense to the fact that I can't be called young anymore. Okay, don't let this beard fool you. I'm a ripe 32 over here. So, what I think, and I speak to law students fairly regularly, and I think Dan is the same way. I think I've met more people from this March 2020 to November 2020 than I did in March 2019 to November 2019. If you really pour your resources into it, you can meet exponentially more people outside of your practice area, outside of your jurisdiction, maybe even outside of the country through the power that is social media. I think people, I've always taken the mindset, I'll reach out to anybody. I'll really answer anyone's DM. Maybe Dan and I are a rare breed. We talk to really anyone that reaches out. Maybe it's because we're both sick individuals and we just like answering sports law questions. But it does open up a lot of doors. I was speaking to a law student in London who was just having issues picking classes, and he reached out to me, I went back and forth with him. So I think people need to kind of still realize, like, there's an expression in the NBA, it's famous for J.R. Smith, former Knick, shooters are going to shoot, and that's Emily, for non-sports, it's just basically a way of saying the worst that could happen is the shot doesn't go in, right? The worst case is that someone says no. So I think if you're applying yourself correctly to networking, to trying to get jobs, to trying to get clients, you can send, right, like 20, 30 cut and paste, opening starters, then you can, meeting people at like wine and cheese events, if those are ever going to come back post-COVID.
Wine and cheese events.
I don't know if they have to. I'm not sure if I'm into it. But yeah, you can hit a lot of people. I think it's really a numbers game when you play it online. But you just have to really pour your resources into it and your time.
Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of Dan's, perspectives on this, but I look at it as an opportunity while you're in law school to, kind of showcase your knowledge and expertise in an area. Now, networking has its place, but it's not a substitute for one, academic achievement, but also there are so many journals that you could write for, both at your school or submit articles across the country to different sports and entertainment law journals. And I go back to one of my best friends in the industry and in life, Michael McCann. He became a prominent sports attorney initially by writing a law review article about the NBA's, age minimum and whether that, could withstand NBA, antitrust scrutiny. He started by writing a law review article that got on the radar of another attorney who hired Michael in a voluntary capacity to assist him in a case involving Maurice Claret about 15 years ago. And all of that happened not because Michael networked or knew the right people or went to the right parties or sent polite emails. He made himself into an expert by writing a law review article that was very well received by this lawyer that was handling a case involving a similar topic. So whether there's a pandemic or not, I think when you're in law school and you don't have billable hours to worry about, or have to be, in person at an office between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., while you're in law school, you have a complete blank slate and canvas on which to paint. And to take advantage of that opportunity and utilize it, I think especially within the realm of sports law, expertise stands out. Grasp of the subject matter stands out, and you'll never be able to convey it the same way at a party or at a networking event than if it stands on its own in a published piece. Now, writing isn't for everybody. Not everybody has a law review article in them, but they really are. They could be a valuable calling card in conversations with people in the industry for jobs. I think it's an undertaking that's worth your time at this stage in your career, and that held true last year, the year before that, and I can only look back or look at my own recent ascension into sports law and gambling law. None of it would have happened if I didn't put in the investment of time to write what turned out to be pretty insightful and persistent articles about a subject that was gaining popularity. And I showcased my knowledge of the topic through writing, not through networking. There's no substitute for that.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, you both have taken obviously a deep dive into what you're passionate about in different ways. I always tell students when I talk to them, including DePaul students, don't check boxes, check on people. I think you can say the same about topics, right? I mean, like, stay up on your craft. It's a huge difference. Okay, so I have to ask before we wrap up about the new Robinson Cano news that's out. If you could talk about that, I know everyone would be eager to hear.
So I guess I'll take it first because Dan is very impartial since he claims to be a Yankees fan, but he tweets a lot about Steve Cohen for a Yankees fan. So he's a secret closet Mets fan. I think we can.
I'm just trying to get his business.
I mean, like Dan, he's got millions. He's got not just millions, he's got billions. So there's enough business going.
Yeah, he can afford a $20,000 per month retainer just to talk to me about sports betting and the prospect of an in-stadium sports book at Citi Field.
Who needs clients if you have $20,000 a month coming? Just take one. So the story.
You obviously haven't seen my insurance premiums.
Man, you have a suite in Madison Square Garden, so someone's paying the bill somewhere. I feel very confident about that. But yeah, so Robinson, he's obviously a second baseman on the New York Mets. The news today is that he received a performance-enhancing drug suspension, his second in the last, we'll say 2.5 years, right around there. So under the Major League Baseball collective bargaining agreement, for your first PED suspension gives you an 80-game suspension. That's half a season. Your second one gives you the full year. So Cano has been on, I think it's a 10-year, $240 million contract. So from a sports law perspective, I find it kind of fascinating. At some point, Emily, you're an employment lawyer, right? Did we talk about this?
Yes.
So this is probably up your alley. It's a collective bargaining agreement dispute. Basically, the two sides, the Major League Baseball Players Association, aka the union, and the league came to a deal. This half-season suspension, full-season suspension, and the third time you get hit with steroids or some type of performance-enhancing drug is a lifetime ban. So what I think is an interesting element, we have a new CBA coming up, I believe, at the end of the following season of 2021. And there's going to be a really fun conversation that occurs. Robinson Cano is signed through the year 2023. He's going to be paid $24 million per year. During the life of this contract, he's now been hit twice for PEDs, for performance-enhancing drugs. I don't personally think it's fair. I mean, the Mets are not going to have to pay his $24 million salary this year because he's not playing, and they made a rule that while you're suspended, you do not have to be paid. So fine, $24 million. Steve Cohen is a billionaire. It doesn't really matter to him. But for purposes of baseball, for the 2022 season and 2023 season, there's $48 million going to a guy who's now a repeat offender in terms of steroids. So, I made a comment about it on Twitter. I'm not really opposed to revisiting the CBA in this one regard, and rewriting a clause that says if you are hit with steroids, right, that you're not guaranteed those same future earnings that you were going to make. For example, if you're in the middle of a 10-year contract, whatever those years that are left remaining, whatever that money is remaining, the team should, I think, in all equity and fairness, have the ability to nullify that remaining terms of that deal. I mean, I'm not sure if the union would go for it, but I think that's a ripe topic for CBA negotiations.
Yeah. And Dan, I look at Robinson Cano's trajectory and descent through a different lens. As you correctly pointed out, I'm a New York Yankees fan, and through 2013, Robinson Cano was en route to a likely Hall of Fame career, and he had a decision to make in the offseason, whether to sign with the Yankees or try to take the highest offer. And with the Yankees, they had offered him 7 years, $175 million. The Mariners got him with a better offer of 10 years, $240 million, but that probably placed him on the road to ruin, because with the Yankees, he had when you're wearing the pinstripes, winning a World Series, he's protected in that lineup, is always protected in that lineup. And I wonder whether his fate would have, been different had he remained with the New York Yankees, because he didn't have to carry the team. He had to carry the Mariners, and with the Mets, there are obviously unrealistic expectations. So he really destroyed a Hall of Fame legacy. And luckily for him, while his career as a useful everyday Major League Baseball player is over, he at least has $48 million of guaranteed money coming his way. But it begs the question, why even take steroids? If you have 10 years, $240 million, the downside risk from taking performance-enhancing drugs is you jeopardize or risk that guaranteed money. And even if his performance was underwhelming, if he reverted back to being a 250, 260 hitter with only modest power, the bottom line is the Mets, the Mariners, the Yankees would never be able to get out from under that contract. So with a long-term guarantee like that, I'm wondering, why would Robinson Cano take that risk and essentially cost himself $24 million, and maybe that's going to carry forward into 2022 and 2023. But that was just really a dumb decision by somebody with a long-term guaranteed contract.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in quick to defend Robinson, who when he was a Yankee, Dan, because we know that you're I don't even know if you're a Yankees fan or Mets fan at this point. I feel like it's Steve Cohen. I started as a Mets fan,
but when the owner of the team is Joan Payson, they trade Tom Seaver. They've basically operated as a small market team in a big market ever since the day I was born. They've never truly had well-heeled, well-financed ownership. I think Nelson Doubleday would count as that. But outside of those 15 or so years, they've been owned by men and women that just didn't have the kind of coin needed to compete with some of the big boys and big outfits in Major League Baseball. Now they're owned by somebody with not only the highest net worth among all Major League owners, but his net worth is higher by a multiple of 3. So if Steve Cohen if he could time travel and go back to 1976, I'd probably never become a New York Yankees fan.
I think that's your fancy way of saying that you are a front runner and you like teams that win games. Dan. I'm just gonna say it. So the reason I bring it up, Cano for the life of his Yankees run, definitely maybe even a first ballot Hall of Famer. Even with the Mariners, he was having a good year. Dan, sneakily, because I had to look this up earlier, 2020 Robinson Cano was actually pretty solid. Hit 316, had a near 900 OPS. 352 on base, 544 slugging. So he had a good year. I think it's people are quick to kind of say, hey, obviously he took the steroids on purpose. 38-year-old heading into the twilight years of his career, he's probably done. So I don't know if it was so intentional. It might just be that sometimes the version of these steroid or PED intake is somebody just not being properly advised of what's not on the list, or they're trusting a trainer as to what's not on the list. And I'm sure 38 years old, Robinson Cano is trying new stuff with his body and taking new supplements that maybe he hasn't taken before to try to beat Father Time. If you ask me on my gut, I think it's probably closer to the latter one. This isn't a guy that's, Dan, like to your point, competing for a new contract. I think he's just trying not to embarrass himself at the plate. But, it's a second-time user. It's a second-time suspension. So he's got to be a little smarter than that. And the optics, and I will say one more thing, Dan. The shocking development of the Mets fans that I'm friends with are, dare I say, maybe happy that this happened. Have you been hearing the same thing from your circle of Mets fans that you run in?
My inside sources in Citi Field? No.
Your main client, your $20,000 client.
If this were the NBA or if this were the NHL leagues that had a hard salary cap, getting Robinson Cano's $24 million off the books would be like a lifeline to a franchise. But in baseball, there isn't a hard salary cap. There's just a luxury tax. And a luxury tax to Steve Cohen is essentially what a sales tax is to Daniel Wallach. It's not that big of a deal unless you're buying a very high priced item. But I don't think it opens up opportunities for the Mets to replace him in the same vein that it would have been had this been an NHL team with a hard cap of $81 million. Obviously, clearing money of that magnitude off of a payroll does give a team more options. But I just don't think it's of the same magnitude that it would be on the other sports. So I know we're talking about Robinson Cano. We're kind of running the sort of the gauntlet tonight on sports law topics. But on the night of the NBA draft, we'd be remiss not to remember the contribution that Spencer Haywood, and probably one of the most famous sports law cases in NBA history, has contributed to the dimension and how the NBA draft is now conducted. There was once a time you had to play 4 full years in college before you could become eligible for the NBA draft, and Spencer Haywood challenged that rule roughly a half a century ago. And because of his litigation efforts and the successful Supreme Court decision, that led to the NBA hardship rule and ultimately gave way to one and done. So some of the most famous sports law cases in our lifetime, impacted the way the NBA draft is operated today. Just
to add one final point, I think also we need to maybe, Dan, for a later podcast, I don't think we're time permitting, but we should get into the fact that LaMelo Ball, selected third overall, was one of a handful of pros in the history of American professional sports to play professional in one league that's not the NBA or the NFL, and now is drafted to play in the NBA, third overall to the Charlotte Hornets. My bet cashed, if anyone was curious, because I had a feeling LaMelo would slip, but for another time. But yeah, I think we owe it to Oscar Robertson and any number of greats that helped establish some semblance of player rights in the NBA.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you're right, Dan. We had a bunch of topics. I really appreciate you guys letting me come on and pick your brains tonight and be part of the podcast. I am really excited to continue to listen to Conduct Detrimental and learn as much as I can about what's going on today. There's certainly a lot. So thank you so much. And thank you on behalf of DePaul for being part of this symposium today.
So, Emily, thank you very much for moderating. I guess for podcast purposes, that'll put this in the books. And guys, we will see you next week at Minnesota Law School for our third and final installment of the live episodes of Conduct Detrimental. Dan, anything to add before we wrap the podcast?
Oh, God. Emily, thank you very much for having us on. RJ, thank you for putting this all together. It's not easy to organize a panel, much less a full symposium. So, I mean, that's probably the best networking advice or best networking experience you could possibly have, considering all the people you meet in organizing a symposium. So RJ, great job. And Emily, you definitely have a future if we ever decide to expand the co-host role at Conduct Detrimental to add a third person. You did a really nice job teeing us up, and we look forward to having this in the podcast arena featuring you along with Dan and myself. So thanks for joining us this week and giving us this platform.
I guess we will wrap, and we will see everyone next week on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.